Hi everyone, my name is Ashley Merkel, and for the last 2 years I have been working with Coldharbour Institute and wildlife professionals in the Gunnison Valley to develop a wildlife management plan for the Coldharbour Ranch. I worked on this project because Suzanne introduced me to Coldharbour and showed me the potential it has and how I can help create something amazing to help conserve our wildlife here at home. I have always had a connection to animals since I was a little girl, and I had dreams of becoming an exotic animal vet. But my experience with the San Diego Zoo, their Conservation Institute, and during my undergraduate career under Dr. Little, developed a love and desire to work in conservation and research. My beginning is what led me to work on this project, but I wouldn't have finished it without help from my advisor, Dr. Pat McGee, MJ Pickett, natural resource managers in the Valley, and my peers at Western Colorado University. For this presentation, I will go over why the ranch needs a wildlife management plan and the process of developing it. This involved diving into literature to understand the complex ecosystems of Coldharbour Ranch and developing an inventory of known studies out there. From there, I was able to work with natural resource managers, my advisor, and Coldharbour to develop goals and objectives for wildlife management. I then developed management actions from literature and advice from professionals that Coldharbour can implement. The proposed actions require a lot of work, and there are opportunities for involvement from the community and students at Western. Previous MEM student Ashley Cumbers wrote a comprehensive land management plan for the ranch that provides a broad overview for land management objectives and purposefully lacks detail that I was able to fill in as my master's project. I developed a detailed and adapted wildlife management plan that identifies known species and habitats, management goals and objectives, and proposes management actions to implement. Working with natural resource managers, my advisor, and Coldharbour, we focused the plan on the riparian habitats, management and removal of invasive weeds, and conserving an ungulate migration corridor while considering Coldharbour's livelihood. It is important to note that Coldharbour Ranch is part of a montane stream ecosystem, which is the most biologically rich habitat in the Rockies. Previous owner, Butch Clark, worked to restore riparian vegetation and reduce the impacts of historic livestock grazing on stream banks. He also placed 2/3 of the ranch under an NRCS Wetland Reserve Program easement in the 90s. But prior to his ownership, there was about 100 years of human land use not aimed at conservation. Railroads disrupted the floodplain, invasive weeds were brought to the landscape, and livestock overgrazed, creating an unhealthy ecosystem. Biodiversity is important to protect as wild species contribute significantly to the functionality of the ecosystems on Earth, and Coldharbour recognizes and values their role. Temecee Creek's riparian ecosystems are conspicuous threads of green and constitute some of the most productive and biologically rich habitat in the arid West. I found that riparian ecosystems, like Coldharbour Ranch, tend to be regional hotspots for biodiversity, which includes structural diversity, compositional diversity, and functional diversity at multiple levels of organization. Coldharbour Ranch is ecologically dominated by Temecee Creek and its floodplain that includes a diverse and functional wetland complex. The wetland complex found on the ranch contains in-stream gravel bars, woody riparian habitats, old river channels, wet meadows, and beaver ponds. Nearly 70 to 90% of all wildlife use riparian areas at some point in their life, and in Colorado, wetlands only occupy 3% of the landscape and have been severely impacted by human activities for over the last 150 years. Coldharbour Ranch before Butch, the previous landowners caused the stream to channelize and restricted the floodplain, causing destabilization of Temecee Creek, increased erosion, and reduced habitat functionality and suitability for many wildlife species. The complex mosaic of riparian areas is important for wildlife and helps maintain biodiversity. These areas only occupy a small fraction of the landscape and see the most use by wildlife. To improve the ecosystems found on Coldharbour Ranch, it is important to address the patches of invasive weeds across the property. There's a need to manage them to promote agricultural production, economic values, and to conserve native biodiversity. Invasive species are a leading cause for the decline of native species, and some portions of the ranch have already been invaded by aggressive species that are listed under the Colorado Noxious Weed Act, Canada thistle and cheatgrass. Canada thistle is an invasive, non-native, aggressive perennial weed that covers large areas of Coldharbour's property. The weed spreads rapidly, primarily through its root rhizome network, and is capable of crowding out native species and dominating plant communities to the point of forming monocultures and displacing native vegetation.
Another highly invasive and aggressive weed species that forms monocultures in upland habitat is cheatgrass, or downy brome. This cool season annual grass affects much of western North America. Cheatgrass flourishes in semi-arid environments like western Colorado and outcompetes native vegetation due to its advantageous life history traits.
CPW has documented a migration route for ungulates in the Coldharbour Valley that crosses the east end of the ranch, right about here. Rocky Mountain elk and mule deer must cross US Highway 50 en route to summer and winter ranges in the Gunnison Basin. While the ranch itself provides adequate habitat for deer and elk to reside or pass through the Tamichi Creek Valley, US Highway 50 represents a significant barrier to safe passage, especially for mule deer. Along with understanding the complex systems on Coldharbour, I also compiled a comprehensive wildlife resource inventory for Coldharbour that includes data on habitat and species. This inventory identifies gaps in current knowledge on biodiversity and the need to complete biological surveys. Current data and information provide a baseline inventory for terrestrial vertebrate species, vegetation composition, and macroinverts of Tamichi. Subspecies identified through the reports and my camera study on the ranch include beavers, Rocky Mountain elk, mule deer, a healthy population of coyotes, and many species of neotropical migratory songbirds, waterfowl, and birds of prey. I worked with Coldharbour Institute and wildlife professionals to establish management goals for the Coldharbour Ranch Wildlife Management Plan. These goals focus on wetland management, invasive weed management, and conservation of the ungulate migration corridor. The goals for wetland management, I identified a need to create a comprehensive inventory and map of riparian vegetation, wetland types, and in-stream habitat found on the ranch. This will provide Coldharbour Institute a baseline to restore and enhance wetland habitat, create wetlands where appropriate, and improve in-stream habitat. To do this, I propose that Coldharbour restores and protects existing cottonwood galleries by planting saplings and placing fence to prevent wildlife and livestock from browsing on cottonwoods. I also suggest that they reconnect historic oxbows to Tamichi Creek like this one here, and that they alter railroad grades using culverts to restore hydrology and the natural flow of water across the floodplain, such as in this railroad grade here. Through many meetings with professionals, it was also recommended that water flow structures are added to create more permanent wetlands for wildlife, like northern leopard frogs and water birds where appropriate, like in this depression. For invasive weed management, I recommend that Coldharbour develops an inventory that lists all the locations of invasive weeds first. Invasive weeds can then be managed through prescribed livestock grazing and mechanical removal when they are most vulnerable. Coldharbour should also consider the use of herbicides, as the combination of all three of these methods will ensure the control and removal of weeds and help promote native vegetation. To protect and conserve the ungulate migration corridor on the east end of the ranch, Coldharbour Institute will finalize a land swap under the Wetland Reserve Program easement and collaborate with partners and neighbors to address the challenge of ungulates crossing US Highway 50 in the Coldharbour Valley. Coldharbour Ranch is focused on sustainable land management that integrates economic viability and ecological conservation. But to be sustainable, it is important for Coldharbour to work with the complex systems on the ranch that includes a riparian wetland complex, migration corridor, and agricultural production to maintain a balance of wildlife conservation with the livelihood of the Institute. A broad conservation ethic will be embraced that emphasizes the wise use and management of natural resources through protection, enhancement, restoration, and creation of native wild habitats through adaptive management to promote a healthy, functioning ecosystem as the foundation for biodiversity and vibrant human livelihoods. I wrote this plan in a way that creates many opportunities for involvement from the community and students at Western. It varies from conducting research and creating maps to assisting with the general upkeep of the ranch and volunteer weed pulling days. Developing a detailed wildlife management plan was necessary for Coldharbour Ranch. While we must take into consideration Coldharbour Institute's livelihood, we also need to look at our own ecological values. As Steve Irwin said, we don't own the planet Earth, we belong to it, and we must share it with our wildlife.